The smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs still lingered in our backyard as I stood at the kitchen window, watching the neighbors pack up their 4th of July celebrations. Red, white, and blue decorations fluttered in the evening breeze that carried the sounds of laughter and distant music from block parties that were still going strong. Somewhere down the street, I could hear children laughing as they chased each other with sparklers, their parents calling out warnings to be careful, to stay on the sidewalk, to not run too fast with fire in their hands. The Martinez family next. Dor was cleaning up their elaborate spread. Maria was wrapping leftover corn on the cob in aluminum foil while Carlos dragged their large cooler toward the garage. Their teenage daughter Sophia was helping her little brother collect the scattered lawn chairs, both of them still wearing the patriotic face paint Maria had applied earlier in the day. It was such a picture of domestic bliss, of families spending holidays exactly the way they were supposed to. It was supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be our night. Marcus and I had planned every detail of our private celebration. The steaks marinating in the refrigerator, the red wine we'd been saving for a special occasion, the blankets spread out on our back deck where we could watch the city's fireworks display in comfortable privacy. I'd even bought new string lights to hang around the patio, creating the kind of romantic ambience Marcus always said he loved. I glanced at my phone for the 100th time, the screen lighting up to show 9:47 p.m. Still nothing from Marcus. Missed calls, no text messages, no voicemails explaining where he was or why he wasn't home yet. "Where are you?" I whispered to the empty kitchen, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of fireworks beginning to pop in various neighborhoods around the city. The potato salad I'd made earlier that afternoon sat untouched on the counter, covered in plastic wrap, condensation gathering underneath from the summer heat. The steaks I'd marinated for hours, using Marcus's favorite combination of soy sauce, garlic, and brown sugar that his mother had taught me when we were newlyweds, remained in the fridge, never making it to the grill that sat cold and unused on our back deck. Marcus had left that morning with a quick kiss on my forehead and a promise to be back by 6 o'clock sharp. "Big meeting with the Downtown Development Committee," he'd said, adjusting his navy blue tie in the hallway mirror while I watched him from the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand. "Should wrap up early since it's a holiday. Then we'll have our own private fireworks show." He'd winked at me then, that charming smile that had made me fall in love with him 12 years ago, spreading across his face as he grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. But 6 o'clock came and went. Then 7, then 8. I'd called him twice, but both calls went straight to voicemail. His cheerful recorded voice felt like a mockery now. "You've reached Marcus Thompson, Senior Development Consultant at Meridian Holdings. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." I'd left messages casual at first, then increasingly worried. "Hey honey, just checking in. The Johnsons are asking about you." Then later, "Marcus, it's getting late. Call me back." Okay. Where the large bay window offered a perfect view of the neighborhood. Families were gathering on their lawns, setting up blankets and folding chairs for the city's fireworks display. The Martinez family next door had their portable grill still smoking, and I could see Maria bouncing their youngest on her hip, while her husband, Carlos, organized their cooler. We should have been out there too. We should have been laughing with our neighbors, sharing stories about work and vacation plans, complaining about the heat wave that had gripped Chicago for the past week. Instead, I was alone, pacing our hardwood floors in my red sundress that Marcus had complimented that morning. "You look like America's sweetheart," he'd said, spinning me around in the kitchen. My beautiful wife ready to celebrate our great nation's birthday. The memory felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else's life. I tried to rationalize his absence. Maybe the meeting had run late. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe his phone had died. Marcus was responsible, reliable. In 12 years of marriage, he'd never just disappeared without explanation. He was the kind of man who called if he was going to be 15 minutes. Late picking up milk from the grocery store, the first firework exploded in the distance. A brilliant burst of gold against the darkening sky that was just beginning to show the first stars of evening. Our neighbors cheered from their lawn chairs and blankets, and I felt a pang of loneliness so sharp it made my chest ache. Children squealed with delight as more fireworks followed. Red chrysanthemums that bloomed and faded, blue willows that cascaded like waterfalls, silver crackling stars that lit up the entire neighborhood for brief, magical moments. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through our recent text messages with the desperate hope that maybe I'd missed something. Maybe there was an explanation hidden in our earlier conversation that would make sense of his absence. Looking forward to tonight. I'd sent him at lunch, along with a photo of the steaks in their marinade. Got everything ready for our perfect 4th of July? "Can't wait," he'd replied within minutes, followed by a heart emoji, and then, "Love you, Sarah. Can't wait to celebrate with my beautiful wife." That was the last communication we'd had 7 hours ago. 7 hours of silence that felt like 7 years. I walked to the front door and stepped onto our porch, breathing in the warm summer air. The smell of barbecue smoke and the sound of children's laughter filled the evening. Mrs. Chen from across the street waved at me from her lawn chair. "Where's Marcus?" she called out. "Doesn't he want to see the fireworks?" I forced a smile and waved back. "He's running late from work. You know how it is." She nodded knowingly and turned back to her grandchildren who were drawing patterns in the air with their sparklers. I envied her certainty, her peaceful evening surrounded by family. Back inside, I tried to focus on anything other than the growing knot in my stomach. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, even organized the junk drawer that had been driving me crazy for months. But every few minutes, I found myself checking my phone, hoping for a text, a call, anything that would explain where my husband was. By 10:30, the fireworks were in full swing. Brilliant cascades of red, white, and blue painted the sky, and the distant booms echoed through our neighborhood. I stood at the window watching the show alone, feeling like I was trapped in some parallel universe, where everything looked normal but nothing felt right. I called Marcus again, straight to voicemail. I called his office. The automated system informed me that the office was closed for the holiday and would reopen on July 5th. I even called his mother in Florida, making up some excuse about a family recipe I needed. "Oh, honey, I haven't talked to Marcus in weeks," she said, her voice warm but concerned. "Is everything okay? You sound stressed." "Everything's fine," I lied. "Just busy with work." But everything wasn't fine. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. I made myself a cup of tea and settled on the couch, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe Marcus would walk through the door any minute with flowers and an apology, telling me about some work emergency that had kept him away. I turned on the TV, desperate for any distraction. The local news was covering the city's Independence Day celebrations, showing families gathered in Grant Park, children waving American flags, couples sharing picnic blankets under the stars. The reporter, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, was interviewing people about their holiday. "Traditions, what does the 4th of July mean to you?" she asked, an elderly man in a veteran's cap. "Freedom," he said simply. "The freedom to be with the people you love, to celebrate what makes this country great." I felt tears prick my eyes. Where was Marcus? Why wasn't he here celebrating with me? The news switched to a commercial break and I closed my eyes listening to the distant sound of fireworks. When the program resumed, the anchor was discussing traffic patterns and road closures for the holiday. Normal, mundane things that felt impossibly far away from my current reality. I must have dozed off on the couch, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my phone ringing. The living room was dark except for the glow of the TV, and the fireworks had stopped. I fumbled for my phone, my heart racing with hope. "Marcus," I answered without looking at the caller ID. "Sarah, it's me, Jenny. I'm sorry to call so late, but I just wanted to make sure you were okay." My sister's voice was gentle but concerned. I glanced at the clock. 12:47 a.m. "I'm fine," I said automatically, though I wasn't sure if that was true. "You don't sound fine, and you didn't answer my texts earlier." I was worried. I looked at my phone and saw several missed messages from Jenny, along with a few from friends asking about our holiday plans. I'd been so focused on waiting for Marcus that I'd ignored everyone else. "Marcus isn't home yet," I admitted, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "What do you mean he isn't home? It's almost 1 a.m. He had a work meeting. He said he'd be back by 6, but..." I trailed off, not wanting to voice my fears. "Sarah, that's not like him. Have you called the police?" "The police? No. I'm sure there's an explanation. Maybe he went out with colleagues after the meeting. Maybe he's at a bar somewhere and lost track of time." Even as I said it, I knew it didn't sound like Marcus. He wasn't the type to go out drinking without telling me, especially not on a holiday we'd planned to spend together. "Honey, I think you should call someone. The hospitals, maybe? Just to check." The word hospitals hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't let myself think about that possibility. What if Marcus had been in an accident? What if he was hurt somewhere, unable to call for help? "I'll call around," I said, my voice shaking. "Thanks for checking on me, Jen. Do you want me to come over?" "I can be there in 20 minutes. "No, it's okay. I'm sure he'll be home soon." But after I hung up, I sat in the dark living room staring at my phone. Should I call the hospitals? The police? How long was I supposed to wait before officially reporting my husband missing? I decided to try calling Marcus one more time. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, to my surprise, someone answered. "Hello." It wasn't Marcus. The voice was younger, unfamiliar. I'm looking for Marcus Thompson, I said, my heart pounding. Who's this? I'm his wife. This is his phone number. There was a pause, then, oh man. I found this phone in the parking lot outside Murphy's Bar. I was going to turn it in tomorrow, but I figured I should answer in case it was an emergency. Murphy's Bar, I knew the place. It was downtown, not far from Marcus's office building. Did you see who dropped it? Nah, sorry. Found it around 9:30, maybe 10. The screen was cracked, but it still works. My mind raced. Marcus's phone was in a bar parking lot with a cracked screen. Had he been in an accident? Had someone taken his phone, or had he simply dropped it and not realized? Which Murphy's is this? I asked. The one on State Street near the river? I thanked the stranger and hung up, my hands shaking. At least now I had a lead, a place to start looking. But why had Marcus been at Murphy's Bar? He'd said he was going to a meeting with the development committee. Was the meeting at the bar? Had he gone there afterward? I grabbed my keys and purse, then hesitated. It was almost 1 a.m. Was it safe for me to drive downtown alone? But I couldn't just sit here waiting anymore. I needed answers. The drive to Murphy's Bar took 30 minutes through mostly empty streets. Chicago looked different at night, more mysterious and somehow more dangerous. The bar was located in a busy district that would have been crowded earlier in the evening. But now, it was quiet, with only a few late-night establishments still open. Murphy's itself was closed, dark windows reflecting the streetlights. I parked across the street and walked around the small parking lot, looking for any sign of Marcus or his car. His blue Honda Civic was nowhere to be seen. I called the number of the person who'd found Marcus's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Probably asleep like any normal person would be at this hour, standing in that empty parking lot. Looking up at the dark windows of the bar, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. My husband was missing. His phone was found here, damaged, and I had no idea what to do next. The tears came then, hot and unexpected. I sat on the curb and cried, letting out all the fear and confusion and loneliness that had been building up since 6 o'clock that evening. Happy 4th of July, I thought bitterly. Some celebration this had turned out to be. After a few minutes, I pulled myself together and drove home. Maybe Marcus would be there waiting for me, worried sick about where I'd gone. Maybe he'd found another phone and had been trying to call me. Maybe this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But when I pulled into our driveway, the house was still dark, still empty, still silent. I made myself a sandwich I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock on the microwave. 2:33 a.m. in just a few hours. The sun would rise on July 5th, and I'd have to face the reality that my husband had been missing for over 12 hours. I thought about our life together, our routines, our plans. We'd been talking about taking a vacation to Colorado in the fall, maybe going hiking in the Rockies. We'd been discussing whether to refinish the hardwood floors in the living room. Just last week, Marcus had mentioned wanting to plant a vegetable garden in our backyard next spring. Normal, everyday conversations between a married couple planning their future together. How had we gone from that to this? I must have fallen asleep at the kitchen table because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and my neck was stiff from sleeping in an awkward position. I checked my phone. 7:18 a.m. Still no messages from Marcus. I made coffee and tried to think rationally about what to do next. I could call the police and file a missing person report. I could call Marcus's office and try to find out more about this mysterious meeting. I could call the hospitals, but first I needed to shower and change clothes. I needed to prepare myself for whatever this day was going to bring. As I stood under the hot water, I tried to imagine all the possible explanations for Marcus's disappearance. Maybe he'd gotten food poisoning and was too sick to call. Maybe he'd been mugged and was in a hospital somewhere without ID. Maybe he'd had a breakdown and was staying in a hotel, trying to figure out his life. Or maybe, and this thought made my stomach lurch, maybe he'd been having an affair and had finally decided to leave me for someone else. I pushed that thought away. Marcus loved me. I was sure of it. Just yesterday morning, he'd held me close in bed and told me I was the most important thing in his life. People don't just change overnight, do they? By noon on July 5th, I'd made what felt like a dozen phone calls and gotten nowhere with any of them. The police dispatcher had been polite but firm when I'd called at 8 in the morning. They needed to wait 48 hours before filing a missing person report, unless there was clear evidence of foul play. 48 hours, I'd repeated, incredulous. My husband has been missing for 18 hours already. But she'd explained that adults had the right to disappear if they wanted to. That maybe Marcus had simply decided to take some time away without telling me? The hospitals were my next stop. I called every emergency room in the Chicago metropolitan area, describing Marcus over and over. 41 years old, 6 feet tall, brown hair with just a touch of gray at the temples. Probably wearing a navy suit and tie. Each conversation ended the same way. No record of anyone matching that description being admitted or treated. I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt more anxious. If Marcus wasn't in a hospital, where was he? His office building was locked up tight for the holiday, with no security guard I could talk to and no way to access the Meridian Holdings offices on the 15th floor. I stood in the empty lobby for 10 minutes, staring at the directory and trying to think of some way to get information. But there was nothing I could do until the building reopened the next day. The drive to Murphy's Bar took me through parts of downtown Chicago I rarely visited, past the tourist areas and into the grittier business district where Marcus worked. Murphy's was located in a busy area that would have been crowded with office workers and tourists earlier in the evening, but now it looked tired and slightly seedy in the afternoon light. The building was older, probably from the 1940s, with a faded green awning and windows that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in months. The bartender, a tired-looking man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many late nights, remembered seeing Marcus the evening before. He was wiping down glasses with a white towel. When I approached the bar, and he looked up at me with the kind of polite but wary expression bartenders perfect when dealing with strangers. "Yeah, he was here," he said. After I described Marcus and showed him a photo from my phone, tall guy, dark hair, well-dressed. Stuck out a bit, you know. Most of our regulars are construction workers and office types who've been coming here for years. This guy looked like he belonged in a fancier place. "Do you remember what time he arrived?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Maybe around 7. He seemed nervous, kept checking his watch every few minutes, kept looking toward the door like he was waiting for someone." The bartender set down the glass he'd been cleaning and leaned on the bar, ordered whiskey. Neat, expensive stuff. Macallan, 18. Not the kind of thing most people order here. Was he alone? The bartender paused, considering my question carefully. Most of the time, yeah. But he did talk to someone toward the end of the night. Woman with blonde hair, real put-together looking, designer clothes, expensive purse, the works. They seemed to know each other pretty well, not like strangers meeting for the first time. My heart sank, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "Did you see them leave together?" "Nah, I was busy with other customers around closing time. But I remember thinking it was weird he left his phone on the bar when he went to the bathroom, and when I went to give it back to him, he was gone. Found it later in the parking lot when I was locking up. Screen was all busted up like someone had dropped it or thrown it." I thanked him and left, my mind spinning. Marcus had been at Murphy's Bar with a blonde woman. He'd left his phone behind and it had ended up in the parking lot with a cracked screen. None of it made sense. I spent the rest of the day calling everyone I could think of, working my way through Marcus's contact list in his desk drawer, trying to reach anyone who might have seen him or heard from him. I called his college friends, the guys he played poker with once a month, the couple we sometimes went to dinner with on weekends. I called his coworkers, at least the ones whose numbers I could find. I even called his dentist, his barber, the mechanic who worked on his car, grasping at any possible connection that might lead me to answers. Nobody had seen him or heard from him. Most of them seemed genuinely surprised and concerned when I explained that Marcus was missing. "That's not like him," said Tom Rivera, one of his poker buddies. "Marcus is the most reliable guy I know. He's never even late for our games, let alone just not show up somewhere." The conversations all followed the same pattern. Initial surprise, genuine concern, offers to help that I didn't know how to accept, and finally an awkward goodbye as we both realized there was nothing more to say. Each call left me feeling more isolated, more confused about where my husband could be and why he'd simply vanished into thin air. By evening, I was exhausted and desperate, sitting in our living room surrounded by all of Marcus's things, his favorite leather chair that he'd bought at an estate sale years ago, his collection of books about urban planning and development that lined 2 full shelves, his vintage beer bottle collection displayed on the mantle that he'd been building since college. Everything looked normal, like he might walk through the door any moment and ask what I wanted for dinner, but nothing felt normal. The house had the strange, suspended feeling of a place where time had stopped, where life was waiting for something to restart it. I turned on the TV for background noise while I made myself dinner. The local news was on, covering the usual stories: traffic accidents, weather updates, a city council meeting about the upcoming budget. I wasn't really paying attention until I heard the anchor mention something about a downtown development project. The controversial Riverfront Commons project has been making headlines for weeks, with accusations of bribery and corruption surrounding the city's approval process. Tonight we have new developments in this ongoing investigation. I looked up at the TV, suddenly interested. Marcus worked in development. Could this be related to his meeting yesterday? The reporter was standing outside a downtown office building I recognized. It was the same complex where Marcus had his office. Sources close to the investigation tell us that several key figures in the city's development community are being questioned about their involvement in what appears to be a pay-to-play scheme involving millions of dollars in public contracts. My blood ran cold. The reporter continued, while no arrests have been made, we're told that federal investigators have been building a case for months, and several prominent developers and city officials may soon face serious charges. I grabbed the remote and turned up the volume, but the story was already ending. The anchor moved on to sports, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Could Marcus be involved in something illegal? Was that why he'd been nervous at the bar? Had he been meeting with someone about this investigation? I tried to push the thought away. Marcus was honest, ethical. He'd never been involved in anything shady, but the timing seemed too coincidental to ignore. I spent the evening researching the Riverfront Commons project online. It was a massive development proposal for the downtown area involving several high-rise buildings, a shopping complex, and a public park. The project had been approved despite significant opposition from community groups who argued it would displace low-income residents and destroy historic buildings. The more I read, the more troubled I became. There were allegations that developers had paid bribes to city officials to secure approval. There were questions about whether the environmental impact studies had been falsified. There were lawsuits and protests and angry city council meetings, and Marcus worked for Meridian Holdings, one of the development companies mentioned in several articles. I called Marcus's office again, but got the same recorded message. I looked up the company website and found a list of employees, but Marcus's name wasn't there. That seemed odd. He'd been working for them for 3 years. I tried calling the main number for Meridian Holdings and got transferred to several different departments before finally reaching someone who could help me. I'm looking for information about Marcus Thompson, I said. He's supposed to be a senior development consultant with your company. There was a pause. I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name working here. That's impossible. He's been with your company for 3 years. I'm looking at our employee directory, ma'am. There's no Marcus Thompson listed. I hung up, my hands shaking. Marcus didn't work for Meridian Holdings. He'd been lying to me for 3 years about where he worked. But if he didn't work there, where did he go every day? What had he been doing? I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my husband was wrong. He didn't work where he said he worked. He'd been at a bar with another woman. He'd disappeared without explanation. Who was Marcus Thompson, and who had I been married to for 12 years? I spent the rest of the evening going through Marcus's things, looking for clues. His computer was password protected, and I didn't know the password. His dresser drawers contained the usual stuff: clothes, old receipts, a few photos from our wedding. But in the back of his sock drawer, I found something that made my stomach drop. A cell phone? Not his regular phone. This one was older. A basic flip phone. I turned it on and saw that it had been used recently. The call log showed dozens of calls to numbers I didn't recognize. The text messages were even more disturbing. Meeting moved to 7 p.m. Read one from 3 days ago. Package delivered as requested. Read another from last week. Be careful, they're watching. Read a third from yesterday morning. I scrolled through the messages, my heart pounding. They were cryptic, but they painted a picture of someone involved in something secretive and possibly dangerous. The last message had been sent yesterday at 3:47 p.m., just a few hours before Marcus was supposed to come home. It's done. Getting out of town tonight. Don't try to contact me. I stared at the message, reading it over and over. It's done. Getting out of town tonight. Marcus had been planning to leave. He'd been planning to disappear, and I'd been sitting at home waiting for him like a fool. I felt sick. I ran to the bathroom and barely made it to the toilet before throwing up. Everything I'd eaten that day came up in a rush, leaving me weak and shaking. When I finally managed to stand up, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I looked terrible, pale, drawn, with dark circles under my eyes. I looked like someone whose life had just fallen apart, because that's exactly what had happened. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at the secret phone. I could call one of the numbers, try to find out who Marcus had been talking to, but I was afraid of what I might learn. Instead, I called Jenny. Sarah, it's late. Are you okay, Jenny? I need you to come over. Something's happened. What kind of something? Is Marcus home? No, he's not home, and I don't think he's coming home. Jenny arrived within 30 minutes, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them. She took one look at me and pulled me into a hug. Tell me everything, she said. I told her about the bar, about the phone, about the job that didn't exist. I showed her the secret phone and the cryptic messages. Jenny listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. Sarah, this is serious, she said when I finished. You need to call the police and tell them that my husband lied about his job and has a secret phone. They'll think I'm crazy. No, they won't. This isn't about a missing person anymore. This is about someone who's been living a double life. Someone who might be involved in something illegal. I knew she was right, but I wasn't ready to accept it. What if there's an explanation? What if Marcus is in trouble and needs help? Then the police can help him. But Sarah, you need to face the possibility that Marcus isn't who you thought he was. We talked until almost dawn, going through all the possibilities, all the signs I might have missed. Jenny helped me see things I'd been too close to notice, like how Marcus never talked about his coworkers, never brought them to company parties, never complained about his boss the way most people do, like how he always paid for everything in cash, never used credit cards, like how he'd been evasive whenever I asked specific questions about his work. I feel so stupid, I said as the sun started to rise. How could I not have known? Because you trusted him, Jenny said gently. Because you loved him and you believed what he told you. That's not stupid, Sarah. That's what wives do. But it felt stupid. It felt like I'd been living in a fantasy world while my husband lived a completely different life. How many other wives were out there waiting for husbands who were never coming home? At 8 in the morning, Jenny convinced me to call the police. I spoke to a detective named Maria Gonzalez who listened to my story with professional interest. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need you to come in and make a formal statement, she said, and I'll need to see that second phone you found. Do you think Marcus is in trouble? I think your husband has been living a double life, and that usually means someone's in trouble. The question is whether he's a victim or a perpetrator. I spent the rest of the morning at the police station answering questions and filling out forms. Detective Gonzalez was kind but thorough, asking about Marcus's habits, his friends, his family. She took the secret phone as evidence and promised to have it analyzed. We'll look into this, Mrs. Thompson, she said as I prepared to leave, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that your husband might not be who you think he is. I drove home through the busy morning traffic, feeling like I was in a daze. People were going about their normal lives, commuting to work, dropping kids off at school, stopping for coffee. Everyone looked so normal, so ordinary. Did any of them have secrets like Marcus? Were any of them living double lives? When I got home, I found a van parked outside our house. As I pulled into the driveway, a woman with a camera got out of the van and started walking toward me. Double quotes, Mrs. Thompson. I'm Jessica Martinez from Channel 7 News. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on your husband's involvement in the Riverfront Commons investigation. I stared at her in shock. What are you talking about? You haven't seen the news this morning? Your husband was arrested early this morning in connection with a federal bribery investigation. We have footage of him being taken into custody. The world spun around me. Marcus had been arrested when, where? I don't know what you're talking about, I managed to say. My husband is missing. Ma'am, Marcus Thompson was arrested at 6 a.m. this morning at a hotel in Milwaukee. He's being charged with conspiracy, money laundering, and accepting bribes in connection with the Riverfront Commons development project. Are you saying you didn't know about his involvement? I pushed past her and ran into the house, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I turned on the TV and flipped to the news. There, on the screen, was my husband's face. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, being led out of what looked like a hotel. The reporter was talking about a major breakthrough in the corruption investigation, about one of the key figures in the bribery scheme being apprehended. Marcus Thompson, 41, was arrested at a Milwaukee hotel where he'd been hiding since Tuesday evening, the reporter said. Federal agents say Thompson was instrumental in facilitating payments between developers and city officials, taking a substantial cut for himself. If convicted, he faces up to 20 years in prison. I sank onto the couch, staring at the screen. This was my husband. This was the man I'd been married to for 12 years. This was the man I'd made breakfast for every morning, shared a bed with every night, planned a future with, and I'd never known him at all. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, reporters camping outside our house, and visits from federal agents who seemed to know more about my husband than I did. I learned more about Marcus's secret life in those 72 hours than I had in 12 years of marriage, each revelation hitting me like a physical blow that left me reeling and gasping for air. Marcus had never worked for Meridian Holdings. That much became clear when Agent Wells showed me employment records that went back 5 years. Instead, he'd been working as what she called a freelance consultant for various development companies throughout the Chicago area, serving as a go-between for bribes and illegal payments that greased the wheels of the city's notoriously corrupt development process. The scope of it was staggering. He'd facilitated millions of dollars in corrupt transactions over the course of nearly a decade, taking a percentage for himself that had gradually grown larger as he became more trusted, more valuable to the network of developers and city officials who relied on his services. Your husband was very good at what he did, Agent Wells told me during one of our lengthy interviews at the Federal Building downtown. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had the kind of calm, professional demeanor that probably helped her deliver terrible news to unsuspecting family members on a regular basis. He stayed under the radar for years, never getting too greedy, always careful about his connections and his methods. We've been tracking him for 18 months, and even then we almost lost him several times. 18 months. I felt sick, the coffee I'd been drinking turning bitter in my mouth. You've been watching him for 18 months and you never told me? We couldn't risk compromising the investigation, Agent Wells explained patiently. And frankly, Mrs. Thompson, we weren't sure how much you knew about your husband's activities. It's not uncommon for family members to be involved in these kinds of operations, either as active participants or as willing accomplices who help launder money or provide cover stories. The implication was clear. They'd suspected I might be involved, the wife of a criminal, possibly complicit in his crimes. I understood why they'd be suspicious, but it hurt nonetheless. I learned that Marcus had been using our marriage as cover, presenting himself as a stable family man to gain the trust of his clients. He'd rented a small office space downtown and had business cards printed, creating the illusion of legitimate employment. He'd been careful to keep his criminal activities separate from his home life, never bringing work home, never involving me in his schemes. He was protecting you, Agent Wells said, in his own way. He knew what he was doing was dangerous, and he didn't want you to get hurt. But I was hurt. I was devastated. Everything I'd believed about my life had been a lie. The media attention was relentless. Reporters camped outside our house, asking neighbors about Marcus, about our marriage, about whether I'd known about his crimes. I stopped answering the phone, stopped checking my email, stopped watching the news. But I couldn't escape the story entirely. Developer's wife claims innocence. Read one headline. Corrupt consultants, double life exposed. Read another. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, but I couldn't wake up. Jenny stayed with me for the first week, fielding phone calls and dealing with reporters. She helped me hire a lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in cases involving family members of criminals. The government will want to make sure you weren't involved, Rebecca explained during our first meeting. They'll go through your finances, your communications, your daily routines. It's going to be invasive and unpleasant, but it's necessary. I had no idea, I said, for what felt like the 1000th time. I swear I had no idea. I believe you, Rebecca said, and I think we can prove it. Your husband was very careful to keep you separate from his business. That's actually going to work in your favor. The financial investigation was the worst part. Agents went through every bank account, every credit card statement, every investment Marcus and I had made together. They discovered that Marcus had been depositing his illegal earnings into a separate account I'd never known about. He'd been using that money to pay for things like our mortgage, our car payments, our vacations. Technically, you've been living off the proceeds of criminal activity, Agent Wells explained. But since you weren't aware of the source of the money, and since you never directly benefited from the criminal acts themselves, you're not considered complicit. Small comfort. I was still living in a house paid for with dirty money. I was still driving a car bought with bribes. Everything I owned was tainted. The worst part was the phone calls from friends and family. Some were supportive, offering help and expressing shock at Marcus's crimes. But others were suspicious, asking probing questions about what I'd known and when I'd known it. A few old friends stopped calling altogether. People don't know what to think, Jenny explained. They can't understand how you could have been married to someone for 12 years and not known what he was doing. I can't understand it either, I admitted. I spent hours going through our life together looking for signs I'd missed. There had been small things. Marcus's evasiveness about work, his reluctance to socialize with colleagues, his insistence on handling all our finances. But none of it had seemed significant at the time. He was good at compartmentalizing, Rebecca explained. Criminals often are. They create separate identities for different aspects of their lives. At home, he was a loving husband. At work, he was a criminal. The two didn't overlap. 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest, I was finally allowed to visit him in the federal detention center. I wasn't sure I wanted to see him, but I needed answers. I needed to understand how the man I'd loved could have deceived me so completely. Marcus looked terrible. He'd lost weight and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. When he saw me through the glass partition, his eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," he said. Picking up the phone, I'm so sorry, are you? I asked. Are you really sorry? Or are you just sorry you got caught? He flinched at the harshness in my voice. I'm sorry for lying to you. I'm sorry for putting you through this. I never wanted you to find out this way. But you didn't want me to find out at all, did you? You were planning to leave. That text message on your secret phone. You were going to disappear and leave. Me wondering what happened to you? Marcus looked down at his hands. I got a tip that the feds were closing in. I panicked. I thought if I just disappeared, you'd be safe. You'd never have to know what I'd been doing. So you were going to let me think you were dead? I thought it would be better than letting you know you'd been married to a criminal. I stared at him through the glass. This man who'd shared my bed for 12 years, who'd held me when I cried, who'd promised to love me forever. He looked like a stranger. Tell me why, I said. Tell me why you did this. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. It started small, he finally said. Just a few $1,000s to pass along some information. About a zoning hearing. I told myself it was harmless, that everyone did it. But then it got bigger and I got in deeper and I couldn't figure out how to get out. You could have stopped. You could have told me. I was scared. I was scared you'd leave me. I was scared you'd hate me. I was scared of going to prison. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. Everything I did was to give you a good life. You gave me a life built on lies. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. We sat in silence for a few minutes, connected by phone, but separated by glass, and by the enormity of what he'd done. Finally, I stood up. I can't do this, I said. I can't sit here and listen to you apologize for destroying our life together. Sarah, please don't leave like this. How else am I supposed to leave? You're going to prison, Marcus? You're going to prison for 20 years, and I'm going to have to rebuild my entire life? I'm going to have to figure out who I am when I'm not married to you. You're still my wife. No, I said firmly. I'm not. I was never really your wife, because I was never married to the real you. I was married to a lie. I hung up the phone and walked away, leaving Marcus sitting alone in his orange jumpsuit. I didn't look back. The drive home from the detention center took 45 minutes, but it felt like hours. I kept replaying our conversation, Marcus's words echoing in my head. I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. But what did that even mean coming from someone who'd been lying to me for years? When I got home, there was a package waiting on my doorstep. No return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a thick manila envelope containing documents I didn't recognize. Bank statements, wire transfer records, photographs of Marcus meeting with various people in expensive suits. There was also a note, typed on plain white paper. Mrs. Thompson, your husband wasn't the only one involved. Be careful who you trust, a friend. My hands shook as I looked through the documents. The bank statements showed accounts I'd never heard of, containing hundreds of thousands of dollars. The photographs showed Marcus at restaurants, in hotel lobbies and parking garages, always with different people, always looking serious and secretive. I called Rebecca immediately. Don't touch anything else, she said when I described the package. I'm calling the FBI. This could be evidence, or it could be someone trying to frame you. Either way, we need to handle it carefully. Agent Wells arrived within an hour, wearing latex gloves and carrying evidence bags. She examined each document carefully, her expression growing more serious as she worked. Mrs. Thompson, some of these documents show financial transactions we weren't aware of, she said. It looks like your husband's network was larger than we realized. What does that mean for me? It means the investigation is going to continue, and it means someone out there thinks you have information that could be valuable or dangerous. The anonymous package changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just the innocent wife of a criminal, I was potentially a target. Agent Wells arranged for increased security around my house, and Rebecca advised me to vary my daily routines. Until we know who sent this and why, we have to assume you might be in danger, Rebecca explained. These people played for high stakes and they might not be finished playing. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, agents, and prosecutors. I learned that Marcus's case was part of a much larger investigation involving dozens of people, developers, city officials, contractors, even some judges. The corruption went deeper than anyone had initially realized. Your husband was small fish compared to some of these guys, Agent Wells told me, but he was connected to all of them. He was like a hub in a wheel, facilitating deals between people who couldn't be seen talking to each other directly. I also learned that I wasn't the only wife who'd been kept in the dark. 3 other women had been married to men involved in the corruption scheme, and none of them had known about their husband's criminal activities. It's more common than you'd think. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in family members of criminals, explained when I started seeing her for therapy. Criminals often compartmentalize their lives very effectively. They can be loving family members while simultaneously engaging in illegal activities. But how do you live with someone for 12 years and not know who they really are? Because they're very good at presenting the version of themselves they want you to see. And because you trusted him. Trust is supposed to be the foundation of marriage. The therapy helped, but it couldn't erase the fundamental question that haunted me. If I couldn't recognize that my own husband was a criminal, what else was I wrong about? Could I trust my own judgment about anything? 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I was finally allowed to return to some semblance of normal life. Though what constituted normal had changed so dramatically that I barely recognized my own existence. The FBI had finished their exhaustive investigation of our finances and determined that I hadn't knowingly benefited from Marcus's crimes, a relief that felt hollow given everything I'd lost in the process. The media attention had finally died down as reporters moved on to other scandals. Other stories of corruption and betrayal that were newer and more sensational than mine, but normal felt impossible, like trying to wear clothes that belonged to someone else. I'd quit my job as a graphic designer at a small firm downtown because I couldn't handle the stares and whispers from coworkers who'd read about Marcus in the papers. I couldn't walk into the break room without conversations stopping. Couldn't attend client meetings without wondering if people were looking at me and thinking about my criminal husband instead of my work. The creative projects that had once energized me felt meaningless now, like I was play acting at having a normal career when my real life was in ruins. I'd stopped going to our usual restaurants, our usual grocery store, our usual gym, our usual coffee shop, basically anywhere Marcus and I had been regulars together. Everything reminded me of the life I'd lived with him, the life that had been built on lies so fundamental that I questioned whether any of our shared experiences had been real. Had he really enjoyed those dinners at our favorite Italian place? Or had he been thinking about his criminal activities the whole time? Had our weekend trips to Wisconsin been genuine romantic getaways? Or had they been cover for business meetings I'd never known about? The house felt like a museum of my former life, every room holding memories of our fake marriage that I could no longer trust. The kitchen, where Marcus had made me coffee every morning, had he been planning his crimes while he measured out the grounds? The bedroom, where we'd made love and talked about our dreams for the future, had he been lying even then, even in our most intimate moments? The living room, where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies and planning vacations we'd never take, had any of it been real, or had I been the only one actually present in our marriage? I decided to sell the house. Every room held memories of our fake marriage, and I couldn't bear to stay there. Rebecca helped me navigate the legal complications since the house had been purchased with proceeds from criminal activity. The government had a claim on it, but they agreed to let me keep enough from the sale to start over somewhere new. "Where will you go?" Jenny asked as we packed up the living room. "I don't know yet. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere no one knows about Marcus or the investigation, or any of it." "You can't run forever, Sarah." "I'm not running. I'm starting over." But it felt like running. It felt like I was abandoning the wreckage of my old life and hoping I could build something better somewhere else. I wasn't sure it was possible, but I had to try. The day before I left Chicago, I went to see Marcus one more time. I hadn't planned to, but I found myself driving to the detention center, drawn by some need for closure I couldn't quite explain. He looked better than he had 3 months earlier. He'd gained back some weight, and his hair was neatly combed. He'd been working out, he told me, and reading a lot. He was preparing for his trial, which was scheduled to begin in 6 months. "I'm leaving Chicago?" I told him. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere you can't find me." He nodded sadly. "I understand. I'm glad you're getting a fresh start, are you? Or are you just saying that because it's what you think I want to hear?" "I'm saying it because I mean it. You deserve better than what I gave you. You deserve a life that isn't built on lies." We talked for about 20 minutes, carefully avoiding the topics that were too painful: our marriage, his crimes, the future we'd planned together that would never happen. Instead, we talked about safe things: my sister's new job, his mother's health, the weather. When it was time to go, Marcus pressed his hand against the glass. "I know you don't believe me, but I did love you," he said. "The man you were married to, the one who made you breakfast every morning and held you when you had nightmares and laughed at your terrible jokes, that man was real. He wasn't a lie, but he was also a criminal." Yes, he was also a criminal. People can be both things, Sarah. They can love their families and still make terrible choices. I looked at him through the glass, this man who'd been my husband, who'd shared my life, who'd broken my heart in ways I was still discovering. "Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Sarah. I hope you find happiness." I walked away from the detention center for the last time, climbed into my car, and drove toward an uncertain future. In my rearview mirror, I could see the building growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. I ended up in Portland. Oregon of all places, a city I'd visited only once before, years ago, for a long weekend with college friends. I'd never been there with Marcus, which made it perfect for my purposes. I'd never walked those streets with him, never shared a meal with him in any of those restaurants, never created any memories that his lies could contaminate. It was a blank slate, a place where I could be anonymous, where no one would recognize my name or my story or connect me to the corruption scandal that had made national news. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment in the Hawthorne district, a quirky neighborhood full of independent coffee shops, used bookstores, vintage clothing stores, and young professionals who seemed absorbed in their own lives to pay much attention to their neighbors. My apartment was on the second floor of a converted house with hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly when I walked across them and big windows that let in lots of natural light. It was small but comfortable, and most importantly, it was mine alone. No shared memories, no history, no reminders of the life I'd left behind. For the first time in months, I could walk down the street without wondering if someone was going to recognize me as that woman whose husband was the corrupt developer. I could go to the grocery store without checking over my shoulder, could sit in a coffee shop without worrying that someone might approach me with questions about Marcus or the investigation, or how much I'd really known about his criminal activities. The first few weeks were the hardest, though. I'd wake up in the morning in my unfamiliar bed and, for just a moment, forget where I was. My hand would reach across the mattress for Marcus's side of the bed, or I'd start to make 2 cups of coffee out of habit before remembering that I was alone now, that I'd chosen to be alone, that being alone was better than living with someone who'd been lying to me for years. The absence of my old life was like a physical ache that followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I was trying to rebuild. But gradually, I began to build something new. I found a job at a small marketing firm that specialized in sustainable businesses. The work was different from what I'd done before, but it was engaging and meaningful. My boss, a woman named Kate Rodriguez, was understanding about my need for privacy and didn't push when I was vague about my reasons for leaving Chicago. "Everyone's got a story," she said simply. "What matters is what you do going forward." I started therapy with Dr. Emily Chen, a psychologist who helped me work through the trauma of discovering that my entire marriage had been built on deception. It was painful work, confronting the ways I'd ignored red flags, the ways I'd chosen to trust rather than question. "You're grieving," Dr. Chen explained. "You're grieving the marriage you thought you had, the husband you thought you knew, the future you thought you were building together. That's a profound loss, even if it was built on lies. How do I trust anyone again?" I asked during one session. "How do I know if someone is telling me the truth?" "You can't know for certain," she said. "But you can learn to trust your instincts better. You can learn to pay attention to inconsistencies, to ask more questions, to value transparency in relationships." "What? If I'm not strong enough to be alone?" "Sarah, you've been alone for months now and you're surviving. You're more than surviving. You're building a new life. That takes tremendous strength." 6 months after moving to Portland, I felt ready to start dating again. It wasn't that I was over Marcus or what he'd done to me, but I was tired of being defined by his crimes. I wanted to find out who I was when I wasn't someone's wife. When I wasn't a victim of someone else's choices. I met David through a hiking group I'd joined. He was a software engineer, quiet and thoughtful, with kind eyes and a dry sense of humor. Our first date was coffee and a walk through Forest Park, talking about books and travel and our shared love of terrible 80s movies. "So what brought you to Portland?" he asked as we sat on a bench overlooking the city. I'd prepared for this question, but it still made my stomach clench. "I needed a fresh start," I said. "My marriage ended badly. I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." "It was, but I'm in a better place now." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. And for the first time since Marcus's arrest, I felt like I could have a conversation about my past without feeling like I was going to fall apart. David and I took things slowly. He was patient with my trust issues, understanding when I needed space, gentle when I had bad days. He didn't push for details about my past, seemed content to know me as I was in the present. "I like who you are now," he told me after we'd been dating for 3 months. "I don't need to know everything about who you were before." It was exactly what I needed to hear. A year after leaving Chicago, I got a call from Rebecca Chen with news about Marcus's case. He'd accepted a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, in exchange for cooperating with the ongoing investigation. He provided information that led to several other arrests, Rebecca explained, including a city councilman and 2 other developers. His cooperation probably saved him 5 years. Is the investigation over? Mostly. There might be a few more arrests, but the major players have all been charged. "You're in the clear, Sarah. You can put this behind you." I hung up and sat in my apartment trying to process the news. Marcus would be in prison until he was in his mid-50s. By the time he got out, we'd have been divorced for over a decade. He'd be a stranger to me then, even more than he already was. That evening, I called David and told him I was ready to talk about my past. We sat on my couch with cups of tea, and I told him everything about Marcus, about the investigation, about discovering that my entire marriage had been built on lies. David listened without interrupting, his expression serious but not judgmental. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. That must have been incredibly difficult, he finally said. I can't imagine discovering that someone you loved and trusted had been deceiving you for so long. Are you upset that I didn't tell you sooner? No. I understand why you needed time. That's a lot to process, and it's a lot to share with someone. Does it change how you feel about me? David took my hand. Sarah, you're not responsible for what your ex-husband did. You're not defined by his crimes. You're defined by how you've rebuilt your life, by your strength and resilience and kindness. That's who you are to me. I started crying then, not from sadness but from relief. For the first time since July 4th, over a year ago, I felt like someone saw me as I really was, not as Marcus Thompson's wife, not as a victim, not as someone whose life had been destroyed by lies, but as Sarah, just Sarah, 2 years after. Leaving Chicago, I was living a life I'd never imagined, but had grown to love. I had a job that fulfilled me, friends who knew nothing about my past unless I chose to share it, and a relationship with David that was built on honesty and mutual respect. I'd also started volunteering with an organization that helped family members of people who'd been arrested for white-collar crimes. It was my way of turning my painful experience into something useful, something that could help other people who were going through what I'd gone through. The hardest part isn't the public shame or the financial difficulties, I told a support group one evening. The hardest part is learning to trust yourself again. When someone you love deceives you so completely, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about relationships, about people, about your own judgment. How do you get past that? Asked a woman whose husband had been arrested for embezzlement. You don't get past it, I said. You get through it. You learn to live with the uncertainty, to make peace with the fact that you can't control other people's choices. You learn to value honesty and transparency in your relationships, to pay attention to red flags you might have ignored before, and you learn to trust yourself again slowly and carefully. After the meeting, a young woman approached me. Her husband had been arrested for running a Ponzi scheme, and she was struggling with guilt and shame. How do you know if you're making the right choice? She asked. I keep thinking maybe I should stand by him. Maybe I should wait for him to get out of prison. What does your gut tell you? That I need to save myself, that I can't fix what he broke. Then trust that feeling. You're not abandoning him by choosing to rebuild your life, you're saving yourself. And that's not selfish, it's necessary. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you, I needed to hear that. Driving home that night, I thought about how much I'd changed since that 4th of July when my world fell apart. I was stronger now, more independent, more aware of my own worth. I'd learned that I could survive betrayal, that I could rebuild my life from nothing, that I could trust my own judgment even after it had been so thoroughly shaken. I'd also learned that love wasn't enough to sustain a relationship built on lies. That trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be repaired. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. The next weekend, David and I went hiking in the Columbia River Gorge. It was a beautiful October day, with golden leaves falling around us and the sound of waterfalls in the distance. As we sat on a rock overlooking the river, David turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Sarah, there's something I want to ask you. My heart started beating faster. What is it? He pulled a small box from his backpack. I know. We've talked about taking things slowly, and I know you have reasons to be cautious about marriage, but I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? I stared at the ring, then at David's hopeful face. 2 years ago, I would have said that I'd never get married again, that I could never trust another person enough to make that kind of commitment. But David wasn't Marcus. This relationship wasn't built on lies and secrets. It was built on honesty, on genuine knowledge of each other, on trust that had been earned slowly and carefully. Yes, I said, and meant it completely as David slipped the ring onto my finger. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, the devastation of discovering Marcus's crimes, the painful process of rebuilding my life, the slow work of learning to trust again. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it had also been the most important. I love you, I told David as he held me close. I love you too, and Sarah. I promise I'll never lie to you about anything. I know, I said, and I did know. Not because I was naive or because I'd forgotten the lessons Marcus's betrayal had taught me, but because David had shown me who he was through his actions, day after day for 2 years. Because our relationship was built on a foundation of honesty and transparency that Marcus and I had never had. That evening, we called our families to share the news. When I told Jenny, she started crying. "I'm so happy for you," she said. "You deserve this, Sarah. You deserve someone who loves you for exactly who you are." Later, as David and I sat on my couch planning our future together, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. Not because I needed David to complete me, but because I'd finally completed myself. I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up, learned who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's lies, discovered my own strength and resilience. The woman who sat in that kitchen on July 4th, waiting for a husband who would never come home, felt like a different person now. She'd been innocent in a way that was both beautiful and dangerous, trusting in a way that had left her vulnerable to betrayal. The woman I was now was wiser, stronger, more cautious, but also more confident in her own judgment. "Do you ever regret marrying Marcus?" David asked as we looked through wedding venues online. I considered the question carefully. I regret that he lied to me. I regret that our marriage was built on deception, but I don't regret the experience. Entirely because it taught me things I needed to learn. It taught me to value honesty, to pay attention to my instincts, to know that I can survive even when my entire world falls apart. And now I know what a real relationship looks like. I know the difference between love that's based on fantasy and love that's based on truth. I know my own worth, independent of anyone else. 6 months later, David and I were married in a small ceremony in Forest Park, surrounded by the friends we'd made in Portland and the family members who'd supported us through everything. As I walked down the aisle, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for David and our love, but for the journey that had brought me to this moment. My wedding dress was simple, elegant, nothing like the elaborate gown I'd worn when I married Marcus. This dress felt like me, the real me, not the version of myself I'd been trying to be for someone else. "You look beautiful," David said as I reached him at the altar. "I feel beautiful," I replied. "I feel free." And I did. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely free. Free from lies, free from deception, free from the need to be anyone other than exactly who I was. It had taken losing everything I thought I wanted to discover what I actually needed. As David and I exchanged vows, honest vows, based on real knowledge of each other, I thought about Marcus somewhere in his federal prison cell. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he regretted the choices that had destroyed our marriage and his freedom. I hoped he'd found some kind of peace, some way to make amends for the harm he'd caused. But mostly I felt grateful. Grateful that his lies had been exposed before. I'd wasted any more years living in a fantasy. Grateful that I'd found the strength to rebuild my life. Grateful that I'd learned the difference between love that's real and love that's an illusion. The reception was held at a small restaurant overlooking the Willamette River, as the sun set over the water. David and I danced to our favorite song while our friends and family celebrated around us. I felt surrounded by love, real love, honest love, the kind of love I'd never really had before. "What are you thinking about?" David asked as we swayed together. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened to you." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. If Marcus hadn't been arrested, if I hadn't discovered his lies, I'd still be living in that fantasy world. I'd never have learned who I really am. I'd never have found you." "Then I guess I owe Marcus Thompson a thank you card," David said, making me laugh. I don't think he'd appreciate the irony. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, I found myself standing alone on the restaurant's deck, looking out over the river. The city lights reflected on the water, creating patterns that shifted and changed with each small wave. Jenny came up beside me, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was just thinking about that 4th of July, I said. "When Marcus didn't come home. I was so scared, so confused. I felt like my world was ending. In a way, it was, but it wasn't ending. It was beginning. I just didn't know it yet." Jenny raised her glass. 2 new beginnings. 2 new beginnings," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, as David and I lay in bed in our hotel room, I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. Not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of knowledge. Not the peace of denial, but the peace of acceptance. Not the peace of fantasy, but the peace of truth. "I love you, Mrs. Martinez," David said, using my new married name. "I love you too, Mr. Martinez," I replied, and I meant it completely, honestly, with full knowledge of who David was and who I was and what we were building together. It was the kind of love I'd thought I had with Marcus, but had never really experienced. Love based on truth, on genuine knowledge of each other, on trust that had been earned and proven and tested 3 years later. As I write this story, I can say with certainty that the worst day of my life, July 4th, the day my husband didn't come home, was also the beginning of the best chapter of my life. Not because the pain wasn't real, not because the betrayal didn't hurt, but because it forced me to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to be someone else's wife. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I learned that I could rebuild my life from nothing. I learned that trust once broken could be rebuilt, but only with someone who truly deserved it. I learned that love without honesty isn't really love at all. Most importantly, I learned that real freedom isn't about not being tied to anything or anyone. Real freedom is about choosing your commitments consciously, entering into relationships with your eyes wide open, building a life based on truth rather than fantasy. The fireworks that exploded over Chicago on that 4th of July weren't the only things that shattered in the darkness. My marriage shattered too. My trust shattered. My sense of who I was and what my life meant shattered completely. But from those shattered pieces, I built something better. Something real. Something that was truly mine, and that, I've learned, is what freedom really looks like.